I want to start this video off with some empathy. I don't develop video games, but I must imagine that it's incredibly difficult to create a sequel to one that's done pretty well and been pretty beloved. It can be incredibly hard to find success with a game. So when it comes, I imagine it feels like you hit the jackpot. You've struck gold. You've finally found something that works. This success is a catch-22 though. You're now stuck with an impossible decision, a challenge of balance put right in front of you. Follow it up with something that changes gameplay and style drastically to keep the series fresh, or stick with what made the first game great. The answer is both. Making a successful sequel involves striking a particular balance between those two options, introducing new mechanics, characters, and storylines that ensure the players don't feel like they're playing the first game 0.5, but actually something original. But you also can't stray too far from that original path. If you do, fans will be left wondering if this is even the game they liked in the first place. This is a difficult task, for sure, but it's not so difficult that it's never been accomplished in the video game industry. Fallout New Vegas, Uncharted 2, Silent Hill 2, Halo 2, BioShock 2, Half-Life 2, Portal 2, Metal Gear Solid 2. The list is as long as a receipt that those extreme couponers get at the grocery store.
When I walk up to the checkout counter, I normally hear, "Oh my God, can you go to another line?"
But a game that tops that list for me is Mass Effect 2. The best way to describe Mass Effect 2 is that it successfully improves on just about everything introduced in the first game in every way possible. The first Mass Effect was great. Tons of new interesting ideas, a fantastic story, a passable combat system with its fair share of problems, but it was interesting. It was enough to make you want to see more, and the team at BioWare decided to take that interest and exceed expectations. I'm going to be taking a look at Mass Effect 2. Throughout this video, I'll be talking about everything that this game has in store. We'll look at mechanics, story, gameplay, and everything in between to try and articulate what a great game this really is. If you haven't seen my previous video on the first game in the Mass Effect series, you should probably go check that out now. It'll provide you good context for the two characters that I created in that game and the choices they made. If you'd like to support the channel for free, you can do so by giving this video a like and subscribing, as it really helps me out. You can also support the channel further over on Patreon, where I upload longer versions of the full series retrospectives and some small extra content. If you'd like to watch me play games that I'm not currently reviewing, you can follow me on Twitch for other content as well. Spoilers for everything Mass Effect 2, and a lot of spoilers for Mass Effect 1. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son, and today I want to talk about Mass Effect 2. Hey Dad, before we get into the high-tech future world of Mass Effect 2, let's talk about the high-tech future world of VPNs. Specifically, Atlas VPN. Atlas VPN is a fantastic service, perfect if you like unlocking content that isn't available in your country or protecting your security and privacy. Atlas VPN blocks malicious links, ads, and trackers. It also can keep your Google searches private. Not to mention the fact that they have the best VPN deal on the market. Have a private Christmas and a safe New Year with Atlas VPN Premium. You can get it now for just $1.70 a month, plus 6 months free and a 30-day money-back guarantee. If that sounds appealing to you, click the link in the video description below and get that Christmas deal right now. That's $1.70 per month, plus 6 months free of Atlas VPN Premium if you click the link in the description below. Now back to the video, Dad. Mass Effect 2 began development shortly before the first game was released. The team wanted to improve with this second entry. They knew there were many spots that were rife with ways to make the gameplay better and tell a better story. Casey Hudson, the returning director, said that their goal was to create something that was less about being a game and more about being an experience. The team specifically listened to the feedback they received from fans and critics. In an incredibly self-aware and humble interview that would look incredibly foreign if it fell out of a modern developer's mouth, Hudson goes on to say that the people that play the games know more about what needs to be changed than the team themselves. There are only a few of us making this game, and millions of people playing it, so it's kind of egotistical to say we know best about what it needs to be. This is actually pretty shocking to read. Like, developers actually taking input and listening to the fans? That seems like almost a far-off dream, unheard of in today's modern landscape of we know what's best for you developer attitude.
You think you do, but you don't.
The structure of the story was one of the biggest changes that was made to the game. This is really what the game is about. A lot of this was in response to criticism that the first game's story was incredibly intense, while the side content was pretty slow and lackluster. The team took a risk and drastically altered the structure for the second game to try and keep the intensity and stakes high throughout the entire piece. Many changes were made to the combat system, the team specifically focusing on individual weapon identity and tuning on the shooting mechanics. Technically, the second game was meant to be better in every aspect. Memory management, better frame rate, improved lighting. Hudson specifically stated, "I actually can't think of an aspect of the game that we haven't overhauled and made 100% better." Jack Wall also returned to compose the score for Mass Effect 2. This time around, they wanted to create a sound that was darker and more mature. They took inspiration from movies like Blade Runner and the music of Tangerine Dream. Each character got their own theme in the game. To give them a distinct sound was to convey their personalities and background. Mass Effect 2 was announced at GDC on March 17, 2009. Mass Effect 2 was officially released on January 26, 2010 in North America for Microsoft Windows and Xbox 360. A few notes before we get into things. The first note is on the version of Mass Effect 2 that I'll be playing. Mass Effect was originally released on Windows and Xbox 360. It was a big title for Microsoft systems, but a year after the release of the second game, it was released on PlayStation 3. In 2021, a remaster of all three main games in the series was released, called the Legendary Edition. This was mostly a graphical upgrade that made some changes to combat and visual presentation to make the games more cohesive. Since Mass Effect was originally planned to be a trilogy, having all three games look pretty similar and play pretty similar works a lot better for carrying our characters through the whole journey. Because of this, the graphical upgrades and the convenience of being able to play these games on modern consoles, I will be playing the Legendary Edition version of Mass Effect 2. I'm not going to list the changes that this version of the game makes here, but we will be talking about some of the more notable ones throughout the video. It should also be noted that as we progress into the series, each game gets less and less of an upgrade graphically. By the second game, the graphical upgrade is almost barely noticeable for the Legendary Edition. The second note is on the nature of this review. If you've seen my videos before, you'll know that I like to tailor the structure of my videos to the games that I'm playing. Mass Effect 2 is no different. It's first and foremost an experience that puts the story at the forefront. In that same vein, Mass Effect puts choice over everything else. You can make choices in these games that will drastically change the story or your playthrough. These choices then carry over into the next game until you eventually reach the end, hopefully, seeing the climax of every choice you've made from here on out. Because of this, I will first be going over the game, its mechanics, its story, and its gameplay, from the perspective of my first playthrough, the Paragon playthrough. During this playthrough, I made more choices that could be aligned with something akin to moral good. At the end of the video, I'll go back through and detail my second playthrough of Mass Effect 2, the Renegade version, where I try to make all of the moral wrong choices that I can. I should also note here that both of these characters were imported from my playthroughs of the first Mass Effect game that I detailed in my previous video. So if you'd like to see those, make sure you go check that video out now. Mass Effect 2 begins with us importing our character from the previous game. This will have a big impact on Mass Effect 2. We'll get a certain amount of credits, experience, and Renegade or Paragon points that will carry over from the previous game. In addition to that, all the decisions that we made in the previous game will carry over. For example, who we chose as a romance, the squad mate that died in the Veermeyer mission, Rex's fate, the fate of the Council, and tons of others. This feature is fantastic because it makes the game feel like it's truly yours. This leads to the entire trilogy feeling like one massive, long, choice-based narrative rather than 3 disconnected entries. Our story begins in a strange area, overlooking what seems to be a planet. This ethereal space, a glass surface propped above some molten magma ball, is home to the Elusive Man. The Elusive Man himself is played by famous actor Martin Sheen, who you all probably know from his monumental role as the narrator in Benedict Arnold Hero Betrayed.
General Benedict Arnold, heroic patriot leader of the American Revolution.
There's actually a massive celebrity cast in Mass Effect 2. Steve Blum from Everything. Adam Baldwin from the seminal comedy spy series Chuck, Yvonne Strahovski from the seminal comedy spy series Chuck, and Seth Green reprising his role as Joker. We'll talk more about the Elusive Man in a bit, but currently he's talking to Miranda. The two are going over Shepard's previous mission, his uncovering of the truth about the Reapers. Miranda and the Elusive Man are part of an organization called Cerberus. They need Shepard to help them fight the Geth, because he's a hero, because he's a symbol. People will rally behind him. We get another text scroll. The galaxy is trying to rebuild after the attack on the Citadel. On the books, the attack was from the Geth, not the Reapers. Even though a massive ship attacking the central hub of the known universe should have been proof enough, it was somehow made into a fairy tale. Shepard is now being sent to fight the Geth and wipe them out. We jump back onto the Normandy, Joker piloting the ship, and Presley going over details of the mission. Our ship was attacked by an unidentified cruiser, and I told Ashley to help the crew. Most of the crew was killed, slaughtered by the unknown assailant. Joker refuses to give up. He doesn't want to leave the ship behind, but I tossed him in an escape pod. It's at this point that this opening sequence takes a turn for the worse. The ship is destroyed, Shepard is ejected into space, and dies. This is a pretty big subversion, but was also a huge point in the marketing of Mass Effect 2. The announcement trailer declared Shepard killed in action. The fans were made aware at E3 that you would still be able to play Shepard, though. I think this was more than a marketing choice, though. Killing Shepard off at the beginning of the game delivers a powerful setup for the narrative that's to come. There's an optional comic that we can view here called Mass Effect Genesis. This was mainly introduced to catch up players who decided to skip the first game, and to catch up PlayStation audiences that didn't yet have access to the first game. This comic recounts the events of Mass Effect, and if you haven't imported a character, it actually lets you decide the outcome of some of the major choices in that entry. It's definitely the weaker option compared to actually playing the first game, but it's a neat little feature that helps everyone. We then see a variety of medical screens and x-rays, something called the Lazarus Project. Shepard is seemingly brought back to life, and we're allowed to adjust our appearance if we'd like. We can change our class as well, but I decided to stick with Soldier to keep consistency for this series. Shepard is woken up from his forever sleep as the facility that he's in is being attacked. We're given the reins and reintroduced to some old mechanics and made friends with some new ones. Mass Effect 2 makes sweeping changes to its combat system. The largest change is that we no longer have the overheat system from the first game. We're introduced to thermal clips, which essentially function like normal weapons in a shooter. We now have to reload, and on top of that, the inventory system has been removed and weapons have been scaled down immensely. This change was great for me, because sifting through hundreds of weapons in the last game to figure out which ones to sell was an atrocious affair. We'll get into some of the intricacies of combat and abilities later, but for now, just know we shoot enemies to kill them, and it feels a whole lot better than the first entry. Fighting through mechs, Shepard eventually meets Jacob Taylor. He tells Shepard that he's in a Cerberus facility, woken up by a woman named Miranda. Not only that, but the year is 2185. He's been dead for 2 years. It's not exactly a good sign that Shepard is in a Cerberus facility, either. Cerberus is a well-known paramilitary organization. They released a manifesto around the time of the First Contact War. They believed that humans would be genocided by the alien races. They went underground and eventually started popping up all over the place, being labeled a terrorist group. They stole antimatter from a ship, allegedly assassinated politicians, and destroyed starships harboring Element Zero. Cerberus claims they are human survivalists, but they are publicly denounced as a human supremacist group. They consider themselves a guardian of the human race, a Cerberus, meant to protect against invasion. With that context in mind, imagine Shepard. He died 2 years ago, went out trying to save his crew from an attack. His mission failed. Then, 2 years later, he wakes up, revived in a facility controlled by human supremacists and terrorists. Jacob didn't know what happened to my crew in the 2 years that I was out. The only thing he did know was that the security mechs that were tasked with overseeing this place had turned on us, and we needed to get out. We met up with Wilson, another member of the station. He believed that Miranda was a traitor, but Jacob wasn't on his side. Eventually, after fighting through a good amount of mechs, we find Miranda. She kills Wilson, who's apparently the real traitor. Apparently she had a lot invested in my revival. She took me to see her boss, the Elusive Man. The Elusive Man was a part of Cerberus, and that wasn't good by any means, but he needed my help. Groups of colonists were being abducted, and he wanted me to investigate them. On top of that, he believed in the Reapers. He knew they were a threat. This was something that the Council didn't have faith in me. They didn't believe that the real enemy was coming. The Elusive Man, even though I didn't agree with his ideals, was much easier to work with because we already agreed on the fundamentals. He was a necessary evil. The Elusive Man himself was something of a mystery. His name told the entire story. No one knew where he came from or who he really was. He penned the manifesto that plunged Cerberus into the spotlight. I couldn't even penetrate the entrance to the ethereal horizon room that he called home. I had to contact him through hologram. The first colony that we're tasked with investigating is Freedom's Progress. All of the colonists have disappeared, and when we arrive, we only find more mechs that are programmed to shoot at us. We have to fight our way through these machines, being introduced to multiple new types as we move forward. We now have small dog-like bots that will explode upon death, small junk mechs, and the massive Emir mech that will become pretty familiar with fighting throughout Mass Effect 2. Mass Effect 2 has made many changes to its combat system, but one of the largest is the tightening up of its cover system. We can now run up to a barrier and press a button to take cover. No more awkwardly flopping around on pillars to try and protect ourselves from a barrage of enemy fire. This is integral though, because Mass Effect 2's entire flow of combat has changed. We now have to use cover. It was entirely possible in the first game to sort of walk slowly around the battlefield with sights aimed down and just pummel everything in our sights. Now that's not really possible. We have to take cover because everything hits so hard. Our shields can be drained in a matter of moments, and our health even quicker. We also no longer have the ability to heal with Medigel. Medigel is still in the game, but it's used to revive teammates. There are skills that we can gain later that will allow us to use the Unity ability to heal the entire team and revive downed mates. For the most part, though, Mass Effect 2 is a lot more unforgiving. That doesn't mean it's harder, it just plays a lot more like a cover shooter than whatever its predecessor was. This is a good thing, an improvement, just like everything in this series. The team took the time to listen to the audience and tuned the combat in very well. This is a common pattern that we're going to have to get used to over the course of this video though, talking about improvements made to the formula that was introduced in the first game, because I'm serious when I say just about everything Mass Effect did, Mass Effect 2 does much better. Journeying through the colony, I eventually stumbled upon an old friend. It was Tali. She's here with a group of Quarians, and they're looking for one of their own named Vitor. Vitor was here on pilgrimage, and they're trying to rescue him. I asked her to team up. If we could find Vitor, he might know what happened to the colonists here. Fighting the mech that was guarding his small building proved dangerous, though, as Tali's squad was wiped out in the process. We're here introduced to a revamped version of the bypass mechanic. This is a much better puzzle than pressing buttons in time with lights, but it also has its own problem. The frequency which you have to complete this puzzle is insane. If you try to do all the content in Mass Effect 2, you'll end up completing this puzzle dozens and dozens of times over and over. This is the same for the hack puzzle, which sees us matching up lines of scrolling code. Both are fine puzzles, but we have to do this puzzle so many times. These are usually guarding locked caches of credits, and by the end of the game I had just elected to not open them anymore. I already had tons of credits, so I didn't really need them, and I would rather not have them than have to do those puzzles for the 105th time. We find Vitor, who barely notices our presence, focused on the screens in front of him. In Mass Effect 2, we don't just get Paragon or Renegade points by saying specific lines to people. We can also interrupt conversations. A prompt will come on screen allowing us to press a button to either make a Renegade or Paragon interrupt. These will usually be drastic options one way or the other. This is a great addition, mostly because of the fleeting nature of them. They can be missed pretty easily, and by not pressing the interrupt, you can miss extra lines of dialogue, exchanges, or even big actions. There is a bit of mystery here, though. You rarely ever know exactly what Shepard will do when you press that button. Will it be as simple as shutting off Vitor's screens so we can talk to him, or as large as throwing a soldier out of a building? Talking to Vitor, who was incredibly nervous, shaken up by his revelations, he showed us what took the colonists. Apparently, seeker swarms immobilized them, large groups of insects, and they were then taken away by the Collectors. The Collectors are a race of aliens no one knows much about. They live through the Omega-4 relay, a mass relay that no one dares enter because no one has ever returned from it. They could be working with the Reapers now as well, which is only the worse because we don't know how much power they actually have. Tali wanted to take Vitor with her, and in return, she offered up the readings on his Omni tool for us to study. I accepted, of course. I could have taken him in, and he might have given us more information, but Tali was an old friend. I tried to get her to come with us, but she had bigger things to be worrying about right now. I reported back to the Elusive Man. He said the work was good. Until now, they've never had direct evidence of the Collector's aggression against anyone. Now, we have a new mission, though, to stop the Collectors, and hopefully find the Reapers they're working with. I didn't want to work with Cerberus, of course, but like I said before, necessary evil. They were the only ones equipped to deal with this threat, or even willing to deal with the threat in the first place. And boy, does Cerberus have resources. They provide us with our first task, creating a team capable of taking down the Collectors. To start off this massive crew, the Elusive Man already provided me with an old friend, Joker. Apparently, Joker hadn't flown since the Normandy was destroyed, and he was eager to get back in space. But we needed a ship, and Cerberus provided one. The Normandy SR-2, massive and enormous compared to that of the original. We're introduced to our first official squad members, who we've already met, Miranda Lawson and Jacob Taylor, both Cerberus agents. We also get to talk to the new Normandy's AI system, called EDI, or EDI. The system is a true AI, but has certain blocks in case she decides to go rogue. One of my absolute favorite changes in Mass Effect 2 is the new ship. Compared to the first game, this thing is massive, and it's not just empty space. A lot of the last game felt like the ship didn't have very much to do. It didn't really feel like home. We could go talk to some of our crewmates every once in a while, but it wasn't anything huge. The new Normandy has a ton to do and a lot to see. First up, we have our galaxy map, which we can use to traverse the systems of the Milky Way and head to new planets to take on new missions. Close by, we have our own personal assistant, Kelly, who will let us know when someone wants to talk to us or when we have new messages at our terminal. We can view said messages from our terminal and look over our squad or upgrades as well. A lot of people will contact us from the previous game, depending on if we encountered them or took their side quests. A good example is the journalist from the first game that we gave insider information to, or even the doctor that we saved when we met Garrus. In the beginning, people are mostly shocked that Shepard is alive again. A lot of the rooms in the ship are still locked, like the medical research bay or some of the lower decks, but don't worry, we'll talk about those as we unlock them. We can help some of the crew, like the returning Dr. Chakwas, who wants a bottle of alcohol that she was saving and lost when the first Normandy was destroyed. We can also help the ship's cook get better ingredients to make better dishes for the crew. The most important thing we can do on the ship is talk to our squad mates. We can have conversations with them, deepening our relationship, which will affect the game in a massive way. We'll get really deep into how this works and why it's so genius later. Shepard also has his own room, the captain's quarters. Here we can buy or earn model ships to display, change our appearance, play music, and even look at our achievements. It's also worth noting that whoever we romanced in the previous game will be pictured on our desk. This whole room is just so great. I love having a little space to reflect and decorate, especially in a game where I'm supposed to be role-playing, making choices, and affecting the game itself. It's another way to make it feel like the character and the game itself are special to me. Also, who doesn't want to buy some fish and display them in a little tank in your room? In general, the entire ship is a massive improvement. We talked about earlier how the team wanted to increase the intensity of this entry. They didn't want as many side quests that felt like we weren't doing much. Now, a lot of the side content and mandatory content is relegated to the ship. This is our downtime, our time to breathe, relax, recuperate, and plan our next move. Speaking of that, our next move was to recruit a team. Mass Effect 2 drastically changes everything, and we've established that, but it doesn't spare the structure of the story and gameplay. Most of the game we will spend preparing for a big mission at the end to go after the collectors. The way we'll do that is by recruiting teammates. After our chat with the Elusive Man, we're given access to multiple different dossiers. These are leads on potential teammates and specialists that we can recruit to the Normandy, bring into our squad, and help us take down the collectors. This structure change is genius and a breath of fresh air for a lot of reasons. The first is that it allows every single crew member to get their own missions, their own screen time. We can find out more about where they came from. We delve into their lives, their planets, their missions. Once they're on the team, we feel like we know them. And at the end of the game, when we get a full crew, we feel like each one of those teammates has a part to play. Not only that, but we feel like they're individuals. In Mass Effect, you recruit Rex, Garrus, and Tali all within a pretty short time frame on the visit to the Citadel. At that point, we already have Kaiden and Ashley, and the only squad mate we go out of our way to get is Liara. She's incredibly easy to attain, and the mission surrounding her is very short. Each squad mate we convince to join us in Mass Effect 2 has an entire level and mission devoted to them. Each mission also reflects the squad mate themselves, shifting its style or tone generally for each one. There are also now a total of 13 spots on our squad and 14 technically possible squad mates in the game, up from 6 in the last entry. Focusing the entire game on the team also brings everyone together and changes the theme of this entry to working together, overcoming adversity and boundaries to develop a powerhouse of fortitude that can be used to bring down the collectors. There's a lot of other reasons why the structure works so well, but we'll talk about those as we arrive at them. One of them is the last mission of the game, and trust me, I don't want to get started zealously raving about the suicide mission until we're ready to take it on. After getting comfortable with our new home, it was now time to head to the Citadel. I had a message from Anderson. He wanted to see me after I appointed him as the Human Council member. Before I got to that, I had a squad mate that I could easily recruit. This mission was about Kasumi Goto. Kasumi is actually a DLC squad mate. There's 2 in the game, and their recruitment missions are the shortest. We basically just have to find them on a hub world and talk to them, and they're in. They have their own loyalty missions that we'll do shortly, but for now, we've recruited the Master Thief Kasumi. When we arrive on the Citadel, we're technically listed as dead, which causes some snags in the scanners. Since we've been brought back from the dead, we have to be reinstated. I went to see Anderson. He was excited to see me alive and walking around again. The council butted in, of course, and they were upset that I was working with Cerberus. They didn't want me going to the Terminus systems, and of course still didn't even believe that the Reapers existed. They reinstated me as a Spectre, and Anderson promised that he'd keep the Council off my back. Now that I dealt with Anderson and the Council, I was free to explore the Citadel. If you haven't noticed by now, the entire layout of the place has changed. Because of the destruction during the Sovereign attack, the Citadel had to be rebuilt, and they're still not done with the project just yet. Things have changed, and there are now tons of stores that we can visit to buy items. A lot of this stuff is upgrades to our weapons. These are research upgrades, which we don't really have access to yet. We can also get souvenirs for the captain's quarters, modules that increase the time it takes to hack or bypass, armor, and even history books that are based on real-life Mass Effect novels. We can even talk to the storefront owners and negotiate a discount for our heroic duties or fame. The new Citadel is great. It's much easier to traverse. There's a lot more to do, and it looks better overall. There's now actually a reason to go to different stores and buy things, which it didn't really feel like the previous game had. Because we were being thrown so many weapons in the first game, actually buying more never really felt necessary. Here, getting upgrades to our damage or health is actually really important. I completed a lot of side quests. I had another interview with the reporter from the first game, disputed a rumor about fish on the Citadel, and helped out a Quarian who was being accused of stealing from a shopkeeper. I headed to Omega next, and quickly ran into my next squad mate that I could recruit, Zaid. This is the second of the 2 DLC characters that come included with the Legendary Edition. Zaid was called the Veteran, and we'll learn more about him through his loyalty mission. Omega is another hub world that's introduced in Mass Effect 2. There are multiple in this entry instead of just the Citadel. Each one has multiple shops, side quests, and situations to get involved in. Omega originally was just an asteroid that had been full of Element Zero. I realized that I didn't talk about Element Zero in the last video, which is a massively important mineral in the Mass Effect universe. Element Zero, which is sometimes called EZO for short, is a rare material. When an electrical current is pushed through it, it releases dark energy and can create a Mass Effect field that can be manipulated. This is used for all sorts of things from construction to faster-than-light travel. EZO was found on Mars when the humans discovered the Prothean artifacts. It enabled them to be able to discover FTL travel and become a part of the greater galaxy. The Protheans tried to mine this element from the asteroid that would become Omega, but couldn't penetrate the outer crust. They left it, and eventually the asteroid cracked in half. A settlement was built after everyone and their mother decided to try and mine Omega of its rich materials. It's now a place for thieves and a hub of scum and villainy. There are just as many shops here and things to do, though. I helped a Quarian get home after being stranded on Omega during his pilgrimage. I visited the Afterlife Club and talked to Aria, who was the sort of leader of Omega itself. I was poisoned by a bartender that hated humans, and I outed him for what he was doing. He was shot by a Turian. After this, I left, and I decided to take on my first loyalty mission. Every squad mate in the game has their own loyalty mission. These are missions that are personal to each character. This is something they need help with. Maybe they need to save someone from their past. Maybe they have a grudge that needs solved, or something they need to move on from. Completing this mission for the character will earn their loyalty to Shepard. We'll unlock an alternate outfit for them and also a new ability that they can use and upgrade. Not only that, but each mission provides a massive amount of character development for each squad mate. Through the course of the mission, you generally learn a lot about them, their past, who they were, and this is a huge amount of story content. This is sort of how the whole gameplay loop works. We spend the largest part of the game seeking out characters to build up our team, and then trying to get them loyal to us. This all culminates in the final mission, the suicide mission. Characters' loyalty also has a huge effect on that mission. We'll talk about this when we get there, but it's incredibly important that we have as many loyal characters as we can before we go into it. Zaid needed help with something, and this was the first loyalty mission that I decided to take on. He wanted to destroy a Blue Suns encampment at a fuel refinery on Zoria. The Blue Suns are a mercenary organization, one that is particularly discreet and expensive. We find out that Zaid is after a man named Vito Santiago, who he actually started the Blue Suns with. Zaid goes rogue on the mission and starts blowing the place up. We have to decide whether to help Zaid on his quest for revenge or save the people working in the refinery. I, of course, chose to save the workers. I knew Zaid wouldn't like it, but I couldn't let them die. This choice led to Vito getting away. This is one of a few loyalty missions where just completing the thing isn't enough to get the squad mate's loyalty. By choosing to help Zaid kill Vito, you'll automatically get his loyalty. But if Vito gets away, we have to make a persuasion check, Paragon or Renegade, to get Zaid's loyalty. If this isn't passed, Zaid will never be loyal for the rest of the game. There are a lot more choices like this in Mass Effect 2 than the first game. It puts huge emphasis on the choice mechanics that it introduced in that entry. We can easily miss the opportunity to power up our team or see big parts of the game. This is great because these are the veins and arteries of a choice-based narrative. We have to be able to make choices that will screw us over. These games are about learning and sticking with your choices to find out what happens. I convinced Zaid and he calmed down. He decided to leave his grudge in the past. Next, I decided to help out Kasumi, my other new squad mate, and try and gain her loyalty. Kasumi is an expert on sabotage, tech, and subterfuge. She's definitely the stealth character of the bunch. She wants to head to Beckenstein, to a party that Donovan Hawk is hosting. Donovan is a smuggler and weapons dealer. He happened to recently come into possession of a gray box that belonged to a friend of Kasumi, Kaiji Okuda. A gray box is a device that can capture a snapshot of someone's memories. It was originally developed to treat Alzheimer's disease. In this case, Kaiji had some incredibly important secrets on the gray box. Kasumi wants to find it, so we have to infiltrate the party. Hawk's vault, where the gray box is located, is under huge security, so we have to hack 3 separate systems. We first have to disable the lasers by following an electrical line. Then we have to talk to Donovan to get an accurate recording of his voice to disable voice-activated systems. I invaded his office and got DNA samples from his things and found the new password for the vault door. When we finally enter the vault, we find that Hawk has all kinds of interesting relics, most notably the Statue of Liberty's head and a statue of a Darkspawn ogre from the Dragon Age series. We can also find the M12 Locust here, an incredibly powerful SMG. It's also a famous weapon, described as the gun that killed 2 presidents. We finally get the gray box, but realize that Hawk has set a trap for us. We have to fight our way out and eventually face Hawk in a gunship. A challenging boss battle, but one we complete. After we left via shuttle, Kasumi opened the gray box. It's here that I realized Kaiji was more than just a friend to Kasumi, but a lover. The gray box has the memories of their relationship, but Kaiji wants Kasumi to destroy it because of the secrets kept there. I told her to keep it. It was important to her, and it was her choice. Because of my assistance, Kasumi was now loyal. This is one of my favorite loyalty missions because I feel like it has everything. The mission structure itself is that of a heist and reflects Kasumi herself, the master thief. Not only that, but the story is incredibly interesting as well. The revelations made about Kaiji and Kasumi along the way are kind of heartbreaking. It's a terrible decision to have to make, to get rid of the only memories left of your beloved to do the right thing. But if you want to keep them, you run the risk of exposing huge secrets. I still needed to build my team though, get more members recruited and bring them aboard the Normandy because we weren't even close to done. The first I took on was the Warlord. The man listed in the dossier was named Dr. O'Keir. He was a Krogan who fought in the Krogan rebellions. He's been working on a cure for the genophage and is rumored to have contacted the Collectors to help him with that. We headed to Corliss, to a Blue Suns camp. Here, we quickly find out that O'Keir has been creating new types of Krogan, one that are genetically modified to be stronger. We find one of them, who's only a few days old. O'Keir has been hired by Jador, the leader of the Blue Suns in this area. The only problem is the new Krogan aren't listening very well and are battling the Blue Suns. We fight through tons of modified Krogan and Blue Suns mercs. The Krogan actually work differently in Mass Effect 2. They still regenerate health, but they don't do it after being downed. We no longer have to load massive amounts of bullets into Krogans lying on the ground. We eventually find Dr. O'Keir himself. He says he contacted the Collectors to help him with the genetic engineering. He wants us to kill Jador to get him to work with us. As we fight Jador, a battle that sees us fending off against tons of mechs, Krogans, and the powerful Jador herself, she begins pumping gas into O'Keir's chamber. By the time we return, O'Keir is dead and has left us a message. He left one thing behind for Shepard, a super powerful Krogan, the perfect specimen, full grown, but still sleeping inside of a tube. We took him aboard the ship, and I was allowed to choose whether I wanted to awaken him or not. I opened the tank. The Krogan attacked me. He wanted to know his name, and I had none for him, but he named himself Grunt. Grunt was very much a being of anger, war, and strength, but didn't care very much for words. You can also see that his appearance is much different to that of your normal Krogan. With that, he joined the crew, albeit newborn and with little choice in the matter. The next target on the list was called Archangel. I asked Arya about him on Omega. Apparently, all three of the largest mercenary groups were after him. He had been killing members of the Blue Suns, Eclipse, and the Blood Pack. He was so much a threat to the Mercs that they all decided to band up and take him on themselves. I decided to join up with the Blue Suns to try and infiltrate their efforts and hopefully recruit the Archangel myself. This involved heading to the front lines and making good on my infiltration plan. I stopped a kid from joining the Blue Suns as he wanted to join for the glory of battle, but he didn't even know how to spot a junk weapon. We can talk to representatives from each of the merc groups on the front lines of the battle. We previously talked about the Blue Suns, which are primarily made up of Turians, humans, and Batarians. We didn't talk about the Batarians in the species breakdown that I provided for the first video because they're much more common in Mass Effect 2. The Batarians discovered FTL travel after finding a Prothean ruin on Bira, a moon of Varush. They eventually found the Citadel and were given an embassy on it. The Batarians got into many brief conflicts over the years with the Solarians and eventually the humans. The humans were colonizing the Skillian Verge, but the Batarians had an interest in that area of space and asked the Council to intervene. They decided the humans were allowed to colonize there as well, and the Batarians closed their embassy on the Citadel and are no longer a diplomatic species. This led to the Batarians being openly hostile towards humans, and eventually resulted in the Skillian Blitz, an attack on a human colony in the Skillian Verge. This was the event that Shepard was involved with during his time in the Alliance prior to the first Mass Effect game. As for the other mercenary groups on Omega, we can also talk to Eclipse. Eclipse are a more biotic and stealth-focused merc group. Their tactics are a bit more rogue, as they don't really care who they take work from as long as the money is good. They're mostly made up of Asari, Solarians, and humans. The last merc group, the Blood Pack, are more pirates than mercenaries. The Blood Pack mostly sticks to the Terminus systems, non-Citadel space, if you will. They are actually banned from Citadel space, but use money and bribes to make their way around. They started out as a Vorsha gang, and eventually came under the leadership of a Krogan warlord, who led them to the infamy they have today. The blood pack is mostly made up of only Krogan and Vorsha. The Vorsha originate from the planet Heshtok and are a pretty primitive species. Their biology allows them limited regenerative abilities, though, as their cells will quickly travel to an affected area of the body and heal it. Heshtok is a planet that is short of resources, causing the Vorsha to be brutal and mostly still exist in clan society, fighting over what they need. Because of this, they haven't really evolved outside of the abilities they have now. As we journey through the battlements, we can sabotage a Ymir mech, changing its targeting parameters to help us in the battle later. Eventually, we bring the assault to the Archangel's place. We turn on the mercenary soldiers and make our way to the Archangel's sniper perch. He takes his helmet off after sniping a merc and reveals that it's another old friend, Garrus. Garrus and Shepard are incredibly happy to see each other, to rekindle this old friendship. Bringing older characters back in this fashion is also fantastic. It's a big reveal, and getting to see a familiar face in this sea of new unknowns is great. We already have a history with Garrus. We know his past and his story, so extending that into the second game makes everything from the first worth it. Garrus reveals that he has a past with each of the leaders of the mercenary groups, and we have to take all of them down while protecting Garrus himself. We have to defend attacks from the bridge, lock down doors underground to keep the blood pack from coming in, defeat every leader, and eventually take down a gunship. Before we take it out, Garrus is wounded. A rocket blasts him in the face and scars him, but with that, our old pal has joined the team. The next dossier I took on was the Professor. He was a biological weapons expert, a Solarian who may have the ability to counter the attacks by the Collector. He was currently on Omega, running a medical clinic. The slums were locked off because a plague was running rampant right now. Luckily, the plague only affected species that weren't humans and Vorsha. Unfortunately, I had Garrus and Grunt as my squad, but they were willing to go either way. Inside, we can find what the plague has been doing to people. The Blue Suns have been killing everyone that's sick, locking them in their homes and not providing them any resources. We have to fight our way through Blue Suns and Blood Pack to eventually reach the clinic and meet Dr. Morden Solus. Morden is quick talking. He barely takes time to let us speak while he deconstructs everything in front of him. We have to Paragon interrupt him just to get a word in. Morden is willing to join us, but first, he wants us to deploy the cure for the plague that is killing the people in the slums. I rescued his apprentice and defused the situation with the Batarians that had captured him. We have to fight down into the ventilation systems and defeat waves and waves of enemies before deploying the actual cure and saving the slums. Morden finally joins us on the Normandy. Morden is a pretty special get for us because he opens up the medical bay, which gives us access to the research module. Here we can upgrade weapon damage, penetration, armor, health, biotic or tech powers for the squad, mining enhancements to the ship, and even defense systems for the Normandy. There are a lot of upgrades that we can get just from talking to the crew around the ship. There's even 3 very important ones that we can get access to that upgrade the ship's cannons and shields that will really help us in the final mission against the Collectors. All of these upgrades have to be funded though, and this is where the planet mining comes into play. In Mass Effect, we could jump down to the surface of a planet, cruise around in the Mako for an hour, and possibly find a deposit or 2 of gold. Now, we don't even need to get in the Mako. The Normandy 2.0 can scan planets and find deposits of 4 different minerals, all of varying rarity, with element 0 being the most rare. Planets will be graded as rich or poor in minerals, notating how many of these resources we can actually find. We have to launch probes to the surface to grab the minerals. Probes can be bought at fuel depots, where we can also buy, you guessed it, fuel. We need fuel because Mass Effect 2 has changed the space travel system greatly as well. We can actually physically move the Normandy around space rather than just selecting a planet to travel to. Traveling between systems costs fuel though, which is where the fuel stations come in. I do think this whole overall galaxy map system upgrade is pretty great. Physically traversing the system has a much better feel than just selecting a planet. It feels like we're actually in control of the Normandy, which lends further to the concept of putting you in the driver's seat of Mass Effect 2, rather than just an on-the-rails adventure that lets you choose different tracks. The one downside to this, though, is the mining. A lot of fans had an issue with this system upon release of the game, so much so that the Making of Mass Effect 2, a large article that Michael Gapper did with Games Radar a few months after the game's release, begins with this line: "The mining? Everyone hates the mining." Now, I wouldn't go so far as to say that I hate the mining. The concept overall is interesting, and the system itself isn't that bad, but by God, there are tons of planets in this game. There are so many that can be mined, and it takes a good few minutes to scour each planet for minerals to make sure you don't miss something. There are 196 planets overall in Mass Effect 2. Not all of those are scannable, mind you, but most of them are. There are a few things that resources are important for, but mainly they're used for upgrades. To get every upgrade in the game, you have to mine quite a bit. I spent multiple hours across both of my playthroughs just mining for resources. On top of that, the amount of resources that you have in Mass Effect 2 will actually affect certain things in Mass Effect 3, so it's important to stockpile a lot. It's very tedious, it takes quite a bit of time, but the system and concept aren't that bad in my opinion. It was a good idea and was a much better alternative to scouring planets in the first Mass Effect game. They just needed to tone it down with how much actual mining you needed to do, because after the 100th planet, it starts to get a little boring. Now it was time to head for another dossier, the Convict. The Convict's name is Jack, and is particularly known for their biotic ability, possibly the strongest human biotic ever. Jack is being held on the Purgatory ship. When we arrive, we find out that prisoners are bought and sold here. They're tortured to a ridiculous extent, and they aren't treated the best. The guards led us to Jack, but they stabbed us in the back, wanting to take me in as a prisoner. I fought my way through and eventually freed Jack, but she went rogue and blasted through multiple mechs before we could get to her. I had to fight through tons of Blue Suns and eventually take down the Warden by disabling his shields. Jack agreed to join us, but she wasn't happy about having to deal with Cerberus, as they apparently wronged her in the past. Regardless, she decides to join the mission and heads aboard the Normandy. So, I know I talked a lot about the structure of Mass Effect 2, and I was mostly right. We spend most of our time in the game seeking out new crewmates to join us on our mission to stop the Collectors. Every few crewmates we gather, though, will be interrupted with a story mission. Our freedom will be stopped for a brief moment while we go off and handle something. In the beginning of the game, the requirements to start this mission are pretty simple. We just have to complete all 4 of our dossiers that we have available, and this mission will pop up. This gets a little more complicated as the game progresses, but for now, we've triggered the Horizon mission. A Terminus Systems colony called Horizon is being attacked, and we're tasked with helping them out. They've gone dark, and to make things even more complicated, Ashley Williams is there. She's been doing outreach as a part of the Alliance program to make good with people of the Terminus Systems. We quickly see what's happened to the colony. They were attacked by Seeker swarms that immobilized them, and now the Collectors are moving in. Fighting through the Collectors, which unfortunately don't drop thermal clips because they're aliens and all, we meet Harbinger. This is the big bad of the Collectors, the one that controls them all. He will take control of enemies that we face and become a super-powered version of a basic enemy. We can take him down, but we have to make sure that we take out the other grunts, otherwise his consciousness will just transfer over to them. We also encounter husks on Horizon, but a powered-up version of them. This proves something important, though, that the Reapers and the Collectors are working together. We eventually get the ability to activate the AA systems on Horizon and fend off against a massive enemy called a Praetorian. Stopping the Collectors frees the colonists that were frozen. We're congratulated by Ashley, the one we saved on Veermeyer. I tried to get her to join the crew, but she refused. She hated the fact that I was working with Cerberus. It didn't matter that we were trying to do good and continue the mission that we started years ago. She couldn't see past the organization. We left on bad terms. After completing the mission on Horizon, we get access to a bunch of new dossiers. The most interesting one to me was Tali. She was on a mission to the planet Haestrom. It used to be a Quarian colony, but was attacked by the Geth. To make matters worse, the sun has burned through the planet's atmosphere. Throughout this entire level, if we stand in the sunlight, our shields will drain. It won't kill us, but it will interfere with our protection. We fight our way through tons of Geth, one of our first encounters with the enemy that was incredibly common in the first game. This level is one of the best designed in the entire entry. It's not very aesthetically diverse, but it is interesting, adding the sunlight mechanic. It really makes us choose our place in the battles. We have to pick and choose our spots, being a lot more tactical with movements and cover than we were before. Eventually, we encounter Cal Rhaegar, a Quarian that Tali is working with. I told him to stay down, as he was trying to martyr himself to destroy the Geth Colossus that was shooting missiles his way. I made my way up to the Colossus and destroyed it, finding Tali just behind it. She decides to join the Normandy, as she's no longer beholden to the migrant fleet like she once was. We also unlock a new hub world after completing the Horizon mission. This one is Ilium, and there we can find an old friend, Liara, who is very changed. She was once very helpful and timid. Now she's combative and stern. She runs the place now and has information on both of our other dossiers. The next mission to take on was the Assassin. Thane Krios was a quick-kill biotic specialist and an expert sniper. His next rumored target is supposed to be on Ilium, and Liara has a lead on where he might be. He's supposed to kill Nasana Dantius. You might remember her from the Asari diplomacy side mission in the first Mass Effect. She had us kill off her own sister to gain control of an illegal operation they were running. Dantius has become paranoid that she'll be killed and has hired tons of Eclipse mercs to protect her. We have to fight our way through all of them and eventually reach the top of her tower. She tries to bribe us, but eventually Thane shows up and takes down his target. He prays over her body and then reveals that he was using us to get to her. He accepts the offer to join the team. Apparently he's already dying anyways, so a suicide mission isn't anything out of the question. Thane is a Drell, another race that we didn't talk about in the previous video. They are reptile-like humanoids. They have great strength and average lifespans. The creatures came from the rocky deserts of Rakana. They destroyed their own homeworld after they expanded into industry. There were some 11 billion Drell on the planet, and they couldn't afford to support every life. The Hanar, another race, eventually made contact with the Drell and transported 375,000 of them to their homeworld Kage. The few that they could save would continue the Drell species on, coexisting with the Hanar, but the leftover billions would die on Rakana. Because of the Drell's relocation, they found it difficult to acclimate to the world of Kaja, and its ocean and watery atmosphere have led them to develop Kepral's syndrome. Their lungs struggle with the new environment, and they begin to slowly pass on. It's not contagious, and Thane believes he can complete the mission even with his disease. At this point, another main story mission had popped up. This one triggers in a little bit more of an interesting way than the first one. We have to fulfill a list of requirements before it starts. The first requirement is having 8 squad mates, which is pretty easily obtained. After that, we must have completed 5 missions since the Horizon mission. These can be any type of mission too, small side missions to planets that may take mere minutes, or longer loyalty missions. This variety in how exactly main story missions pop up is a huge addition to the structure of the game as well. You almost never know when these things are going to happen. The story forces itself on you, and it doesn't wait for you to gallivant around the galaxy and continue with it. If it's ready, then you have no choice but to accept. It also fits the narrative a lot more of a galaxy in peril. We shouldn't be running around to remote planets and gathering minerals if something big is on the horizon. The elusive man gives us word that he's found a collector ship out in space. The ship was disabled by a group of Turians that went to battle with it and lost. We head through the ship, finally seeing the collector's own work and technology. They sleep in pods, there are piles of bodies around the ship, and we find out a massive piece of information. The collectors are actually Protheans, controlled by the Reapers and genetically modified to fight for them. This is another massive recontextualization of the story, a huge twist that puts our entire mission into question. We get access to a new weapon here, an upgrade to our previous one. If we have a weapon type fully upgraded at this point, the assault rifle, for example, then we get a super-powered version of that weapon. I did, and it was easily the best weapon in the game. The assault rifle I got came with a massive clip and did tons of damage. It was incredibly inaccurate, but I fixed that with some upgrades in the research bay. We have to fight through tons of Protheans, collectors here. They use their floating platforms to attack us, basic collectors, advanced ones, Harbinger taking control of them at certain intervals, and Scions, massive hulking beasts that have a ton of armor and send shockwaves at us. Before we move on here, I should talk about powers and how they've been changed for Mass Effect 2. The entire skill tree has been consolidated down a lot. Each squad mate now only has a few skills to start off with, and one extra that they gain from their loyalty mission. We actually only have a few as well, and can gain another powerful one through upgrades. Each of the characters' skills are based on what class they are, or what class we chose at the beginning of the game. Each character, including Shepard, also has a passive skill that can be upgraded to increase health, weapon damage, biotic damage, etc., depending on their class. When we upgrade any stat to max, it will transform, and we can choose one of two final forms for it. This whole system works much better. It's much more straightforward and doesn't feel like it messes around as much. The previous game felt like there were way too many skills that really didn't do a whole lot. Mass Effect 2 has also done away with the Charm and Intimidate skills, so we don't actually have to buy a skill to get Paragon or Renegade persuasions. It just depends on how high either of those ranks are. It's just a much better system overall, a lot more clean. A lot of people took issue that Mass Effect 2 was removing RPG elements, but I think it's in service of a much better experience. We eventually get Edie to take some information on the Collector's ship, and she reveals that the distress signal from the Turians was a fake, a trap to get us onto the ship. Not only that, but the elusive man knew about it. We fight off the Collectors here and make our escape. I confronted the elusive man, but he just said he did what he had to do. I was starting to see how Cerberus worked. I never agreed with them or their ideals. They were a means to an end, but their decisions were starting to affect how my mission went, the safety of my crew. We found some more important information, though, on the ship. The Collectors used the Omega-4 relay to return to their base, but it was at the core of the galaxy, filled with exploding stars and black holes. The Collectors have a specific type of IFF transponder that allows them to travel through the relay safely. Not only that, but we found the location of a destroyed Reaper, and we can get that transponder. This is the last big story mission that we have the choice of starting. We can actually venture there and grab the transponder whenever we'd like, but we still have a crew to build up. The next dossier is the Justicar. Her name is Justicar Samara, a highly powerful biotics user with extensive weapon training. She was sighted last on Ilium. A Justicar is a special type of Asari. It closely resembles a monastic tradition. They follow the code of the Justicars, swear off having children, and dedicate their lives to traveling through space and bringing justice down upon wrongdoers. Samara herself would compare the Justicar code to knights in the medieval world or the samurais of Japan. Justicars themselves are few and far between, though, because most of them die in their line of work and pursuit of duty. We went to find Samara on Ilium. She was investigating the murder of a Volus. The police let us through, and we find Samara rather quickly, interrogating a soldier. She's been looking for someone for quite some time, and she'll only join our crew if we help her find them. The Asari police take her in, and according to the code of the Justicar, she'll have to kill them all in a day if she isn't let go. We have to find the name of the ship that her target left on, and we have to fight through many mercs, a gunship, and eventually Captain Wasea. We find the name of the ship, and Samara decides to join our crew. There is one more squad mate that we can get before the end of the game, but this actually happens during the mission to get the IFF. There's also some weird hidden requirements that we have to make before the final mission starts, so we want to get every crew member loyal before we do that. Otherwise, we'll be running into problems. Like I said before, these loyalty missions not only prepare us for the final mission of the game, but they also give us a larger insight into the characters themselves. Bringing us closer with our own crew solidifies our bond as a team. It develops characters, and each story has its own twists, turns, and choices to make. Miranda needs to travel to Ilium. An old friend named Niket is helping out Miranda's adoptive family. We fight through a compound to get Miranda's family safe, but in the end, Niket sells them out to Eclipse. I stopped Miranda from shooting him even though she was angry. We had to fight off the Eclipse. Miranda saw her family and her sister leaving. She wanted to keep her distance, but I convinced her to talk to them. With this, Miranda was loyal to the mission and fully committed to stopping the Collectors. Next, I had to deal with Grunt. See, Grunt is in an odd place. Normally, it's customary for Krogan to complete a rite of passage. This is a classic initiation ritual that sees them passing into adulthood. But Grunt wasn't a normal Krogan. He had been born in a lab. He was different, but he still felt something was off and couldn't control his rage. If I was going to be trusting him to come on this mission with us, then he needed to be centered. We headed to Tuchanka, the Krogan homeworld. This is one of the things that Mass Effect 2 is a master at, building upon everything that we heard about in the previous game. Reading into the lore of the first game, we heard about the First Contact War, about the Turians, about the Solarians saving the Krogans from the destruction of their homeworld, about the Krogan rebellions, about the migrant fleet that carries the Quarians across the galaxy. All of these things work to build the world up around us, making us inevitably more intrigued and interested. Now, in the sequel, we get to see those things. One of the biggest moments for me was finally seeing Tuchanka. I had pictured this battered, bruised, and broken world, completely destroyed by nuclear war, a place harsh enough to make the Krogans the species that they've become. Mass Effect hooks us in with interesting premises, lore, and history, but Mass Effect 2 fleshes all of that stuff out. We finally get to see these places for ourselves, and the world is made all the larger for it. Tuchanka lives up to its name. The place is built on rubble, almost poverty-stricken. Even Rex, our old friend who is now the head of the Urdnot clan, has his royal throne sat upon big pieces of broken concrete. Speaking to Rex, he tells us of the ceremonial rite of passage that all young Krogan go through. He has to prove himself and pass the test, and even though some do not agree with letting him take the test at all, Rex lets him, because he has a good heart. We entered the arena, where we were forced to survive an onslaught of the Tuchanka wilds for 5 minutes. This ends when we face a Thresher Maw. We can just simply survive here or prove ourselves even further by killing the Thresher Maw on foot, which we did. After this, Gatatog Uvenk shows up. He wants Grunt to join his clan, even though he didn't support Grunt taking the rights in the first place, because he wasn't a natural Krogan. I told him that Grunt would never join his clan, and we fought. Grunt is inducted into Clan Urdnot, now officially brothers with Rex. Grunt also got some big props from the Krogans, as no one has slain a Thresher Maw since Rex took his rite of passage. With that, Grunt had found some sort of peace and center and was loyal to the mission. It's worth noting here that Tuchanka is also sort of its own mini-hub world. It only has 2 shops and a couple of side quests. It definitely doesn't rival the likes of Ilium, the Citadel, or Omega, but I'd list it as a half of a hub world. Our pursuit and our crew's loyalty led us next to Mordin Solus. Mordin is first and foremost a scientist. He's incredibly intelligent and actually a very important character in the overall story. We learn through speaking with him that he worked on a project years ago that dealt with the genophage. If you don't remember what that is, it was a genetic disease that was created by the Solarians to stunt the population growth of the Krogan, to prevent them from taking over the galaxy. It's racked their population for a while now, and the people are slowly dying out. It causes most of their children to die upon birth, something that you have to imagine influences their entire lives, societies, and cultures. Morden and his team were studying the genophage and found that the Krogan were overcoming the disease by themselves. Morden and the team wanted to develop a new genophage that would limit the reproductive capabilities of Krogan to keep them at sustainable levels. If this didn't happen, Morden thought that the Krogan population would get out of control again, and the Citadel races, or others, would go to war. It would then result in the total genocide of the Krogan people. When the mission to disperse the new disease was complete, Morden felt conflicted with what he had done. He knew it was the right thing to do for the betterment of society and possibly kept the Krogans around altogether, but he didn't feel good about it. Now his teammate, Malon, is in trouble, captured on Tuchanka. He wants to help him and possibly reconcile with the things that he did before. We travel to Tuchanka and find that Malon has been kidnapped by the Werelock clan. This is one of the better loyalty missions in the game because of the complexity of the subject matter. The whole scenario involving Morden raises some serious and large ethical and moral questions. Was it right to modify the genophage? Was saving a people and preventing all-out war the morally good thing to do, even though it comes at the cost of genetically suppressing an entire species? These are questions that Morden wrestles with, but at the same time, Shepard and the player are also wrestling with the same questions. It's incredibly complex, and introducing such a nuanced moral conversation into a game like this was something I never really expected. If you land on the side of the Krogan, you might even begin to look down upon your own squad mate, which results in even more complex feelings and ideas. Working with a man that you may believe was instrumental in the suppression of an entire population is conflicting at the very least. But when we find Malon, everything gets even more complex. Malon has been having the same feelings as Morden. He feels conflicted with what they did and wants to right the wrongs that their team made. He's gone so far as to work with the Krogan to develop a cure for the genophage. Malon hasn't been going about this in the best way, though. He's been torturing people and experimenting on them to achieve his goals. Morden hates Malon for this and wanted to kill him, but I stopped him. This is the closest that we've ever come to having a cure to the genophage. It's not entirely there, but it's really important. I decided to tell Morden to keep the data. Even if it was achieved unethically, it could be put to good use and eventually right the wrongs that Morden made in his past. With that, Morden was loyal to the Normandy's mission, and at least partly left the past in the past. I decided to help Jacob next. He was dealing with issues with his father, who he hadn't seen in 10 years. He was serving on a ship, the Hugo Gernsback, and it disappeared. The last place their distress beacon was heard from was Aya, and Jacob wants some closure. We can find the crashed ship pretty quickly after landing on the planet. We find logs and text here that tells us briefly what happened. Jacob's father, Roland, was made captain after the first one died. The local plant life seemed to be taking some sort of psychological toll on the crew of the ship. The ranking officers of the ship have used that toll to create an ideal world for themselves, putting others into slavery, serving them. We have to fight our way through mind-controlled people to eventually find Ronald Taylor himself. He turned on the other officers to have enough food for himself and lives like royalty. He doesn't even recognize his son at first and then begins to lie to try and cover up his crimes. Jacob has had enough, though. I decided to turn him over to the Alliance. Back on the Normandy, Jacob wants to know who sent him the distress call, and Miranda owns up to it. With that, Jacob is officially loyal to the mission to stop the Collectors, an official part of the crew. Before I made it to the next loyalty mission, there was something important to be taken care of. I had to pay respect to the past. At the beginning of the game, when Shepard died, so did many of the Normandy crew. The original Normandy was destroyed, and its crash site still stands. We can visit this place and get flashbacks to the past. We can also find the dog tags of each crew member that died in the wreckage. Before I left, I placed a monument to the crew and sacrifice that was made on that mission. Samara needed help. The person that she was looking for was actually her daughter, Morinth. She's been spotted on Omega and has just killed someone. We investigated the victim's apartment and found out a way to lure Morinth out. I had to get her attention by gallivanting around the VIP area of the Afterlife Club. Here, there's 6 tasks that we can complete. Certain ones are only available to Renegade and others to Paragon. These can involve protecting a girl who's being harassed or dancing with someone on the dance floor. Eventually, Morinth took an interest in me and I wooed her with my knowledge of art and music. Eventually, she invited me up to her apartment. Here, we have to pass a ton of persuasion checks to not be mind-controlled by Morinth. Eventually, Samara breaks in and the two enter a magic wizard biotic wand duel. We choose who the winner is, either Samara or Morinth. I chose Samara. She was already a part of my crew and wasn't the one running around killing people. Morinth was killed and Samara got the closure that she needed. She was now fully loyal to the mission. The next crew member that needed help was Jack. Jack was originally abducted as a child on Eden Prime. She was eventually taken to the Telton facility on Praja. Jack was the core of a project to create biotic freaks, superhuman, incredibly powerful children. She wants to return to the facility to destroy it, getting the closure for the trauma and abuse that she suffered in the past. Throughout the facility, Jack slowly reveals everything about her childhood. We find bloodstains on the walls, logs from the facility, and eventually fight some Blood Pack members. The facility itself was actually an outfit of Cerberus, which was why Jack was so mistrusting of them in the first place. Inside the facility, we find Aresh, another child that was experimented on. He wants to rebuild the facility and do it right this time. I told Jack to let him go, even though she wanted to channel her rage and kill him. I walked around the room with her as she relived her childhood memories of being in this room, trying to escape, and eventually getting away. She plants the bomb and blows the place sky high as we fly away, leaving it in the past. She's now officially loyal to the crew and the mission. There's a little bit of a complication here, though. Jack and Miranda don't exactly get along, and after we've completed their loyalty missions, we find them fighting on board the ship. This is a super important moment because we have to pick which one to side with. If we side with Jack, we potentially lose Miranda's loyalty and vice versa. I did lie a little bit because we don't exactly have to choose a side. If we have enough Paragon or Renegade points, we can actually convince both of them to calm down and settle their differences, which keeps both of their loyalties. I haven't talked about this yet, but Mass Effect 2 introduces a physical effect to the Paragon and Renegade system. One side effect of Shepard's resurrection and injuries is that the more anger, stress, and evil that he has, the more his body will reflect it. Cracks will begin to form on his face, showing his rage. In-game, this translates to more Renegade points, more cracks on the face. If you're Paragon, you won't see this, but a Renegade character will have an almost molten, grotesque face. There is a feature in the game that lets you spend a lot of resources to get rid of these effects permanently, but I decided against using this. The old friend and sniper Garrus had been busy while Shepard was dead. He was working as a part of a team for a while. A Turian named Sidonis requested Garrus's help on a job, and the job wasn't real. When Garrus returned to his base, he found his entire team slaughtered, and the remaining crew members didn't hold the squad up for long. Sidonis was recently spotted on the Citadel, and Garrus wants to track him down. We have to find Sidonis, using other people to get to him, and eventually lure him out. We confront him, and Shepard is supposed to get him in position for Garrus to shoot him. I decided to not let this happen, though. Garrus couldn't do this. Revenge was never the answer, and he was grateful that I stopped him last time. I warned Sidonis, and C-Sec took him away to be arrested for the murders. With that, Garrus was loyal to the crew and the mission. The last loyalty mission that I embarked on before heading off to the Reaper IFF was Thanes. Thane became an assassin at a young age, trained by the Hanar. He has killed for most of his life, but one day met the woman he loved. Eventually, they had a child, Koliat. Thane grew slowly apart from his family after freelancing his assassin services to make money. His wife was killed as revenge for one of his assassinations, and he went on a hunt to kill the man that did it. After this was complete, Thane gave his son to his family to take care of him. Now, years later, Thane has learned that his son is taking up in his father's footsteps, becoming an assassin himself, and he's planning to kill a Turian politician. We have to find the man and follow him along at a fundraiser, making sure he doesn't stay out of sight for too long. It's actually pretty easy to fail this mission and lose Thane's loyalty for good. If we don't update him regularly on the position of the politician, then it's over. No retries. We find Koliat, who's about to complete his mission, and he complains that his father was never around, only caring now. Thane reveals that he felt responsible for his wife's death and couldn't deal with that guilt. Koliat eventually backs off and convinces C-Sec to give him a light sentence, community service. With this, Thane's guilt was being dealt with, and he was ready to head out on the mission. So there's still a couple loyalty missions left to complete before we head to the end of the game, and one more crew member to get. I decided to go complete the next main story mission at this point, so I could get said crew member. We head to the disabled Reaper, which was filled with massive amounts of husks. We have to defend off waves of them while also defeating scions and the like. Eventually, we find the drive core of the Reaper, and it serves as the final boss for this mission. We destroy it and get the IFF, but something strange happens. A Geth calls out to Shepard and helps us fight. He's damaged, and we decided to take him in, as no one has ever captured a Geth intact. We can actually decide whether to keep it and awaken the machine to make it our final squad mate, or send it off to Cerberus. I decided to let him join us. When he was awoken, he called himself Legion. Now that we got the Reaper IFF, the only thing to do was wait until EDI finished installing the IFF into the Normandy. Now, this is where things get real complicated. So we can only do 4 missions here before EDI finishes work on the IFF. Once that's done, the game will railroad us to the end phase, and completing loyalty missions and the like won't really be necessary anymore outside of seeing the content in them. So we only have a brief period of time to wrap things up before the game is over. I still had 2 people left whose missions hadn't been completed, Tali and Legion. I decided to help out Tali first. She had received a message from the Admiralty Board of the Migrant Fleet. They were charging her with treason, so we went to see what the hell was happening. Tali is being accused of sending Geth parts to the Alarai, a lab ship that's now being attacked by the Geth and is overrun. On top of that, she's been renamed. Originally, Tali's name was Talizora Nar Rhea, having grown up on the ship Rhea. Her name then changed to Talizora Vas Nima after completing her pilgrimage and changing ships to the Nima. Now, being accused of treason, she's been stripped of her ship name, now Talizora Vas Normandy. This is basically a form of exile in Quarian culture. Tali's father is also on the Alarai, so Shepard volunteers to help her clear the ship of Geth and clear Tali's name in the process. We can speak to the members of the Admiralty Board and find out that Tali is being made an example of, as part of a much larger political scheme. We eventually board the ship and start taking down Geth, only to find Tali's father dead. We find evidence that Tali's father was the one that had Geth on the ship, as he was researching them. Tali has been proven innocent, but if the evidence is used in court, her father's name will be shamed forever. I didn't need evidence to prove Tali innocent. She had fought against Sovereign with us, joined many missions with the current crew, and just cleared the Geth off of the Alarai. She was worth it, and the board realized that, pushing away her crimes without slandering her father's name. With that, Tali was loyal to the mission and ready to go. I should briefly talk about romance here. The romance system has been greatly expanded with every other system in Mass Effect 2. In the first game, we only had 3 options. We had 2 people that we could romance based on our gender, Ashley or Liara for a male Shepard, and Kaiden or Liara for a female Shepard. We have many more options in the sequel. Male Shepard can romance Miranda, Tali, or Jack. Fem Shep can romance Jacob, Garrus or Thane. Both genders also have the option of having brief flirting or romantic interests in Kelly, Samara, or Morinth. The options here are quite expanded, and the conversations between the person or romantic interest are also widened greatly. Each romance usually sees us having about 4 or 5 new conversations with each person. We can fail these interactions by making the wrong choices. If we don't, we can end up learning a lot more about each character. It isn't always just romantic information. This can be info that's integral to the character itself. It's a great system for people that want to chase love in this galactic war. After Tali's mission, I went to go do a DLC mission called Overlord. This whole thing deals with a rogue VI that was made to try and control the Geth. It eventually went haywire and tried to escape, possibly taking control of every device in the galaxy. Mass Effect 2 is one of those rare games that actually has really good DLC. Most of it doesn't feel hammed in an effort to just get more money out of the customers. It feels like a genuine expansion to the base game and some extra content that feels worthwhile. Overlord exemplifies that, and it's a huge style and tone shift from the base game. It has a really terrifying and kind of macabre atmosphere, especially discovering the man behind the VI at the end of the mission. This imagery is unexpectedly grotesque for a Mass Effect game and really manages to shock you with its brutality. Now this is where things got complicated for my playthrough. Remember how I said that triggering the final mission is a little complex? Well, that's because it is. The way the game works is once the Reaper IFF installation starts, an invisible countdown begins at 4, and moves down 1 every time you complete a mission or side quest. Once it hits 0, the IFF is ready and we're whisked away into the endgame. There's a weird caveat where if your journal is empty, then the Reaper IFF just installs itself automatically. I was planning on doing Legion's loyalty mission last, so I could have a fully loyal crew, but even I miscalculated this last mission, and the endgame began. For the IFF installation to finish, we have to let the Normandy sit in space. Because of this, the crew heads off on a shuttle and lets the thing work. Unfortunately, as soon as the installation is complete, the IFF broadcasts a signal to the collectors, and they begin attacking the ship. This is probably where one of my favorite parts of the game comes in. The ship is locked down and Joker can't do anything, so EDI needs to be freed of her shackles to take control of the ship and save the Normandy, but the only one that can remove the restraints is Joker. We haven't really talked about Joker too much, but he's probably one of the most important characters that don't actually fire a weapon. He's always wisecracking and is built up in the first game to be the incredibly competent pilot that gets the job done and is incredibly sarcastic along the way. But Joker has Vrolik's disease, also known as osteogenesis imperfecta. This is a severe brittleness of the bones, hence why Joker is constantly sitting. I always thought about it like Mr. Glass from Unbreakable, and unfortunately, Glass. Joker has saved the galaxy before, sure. He was one of the primary reasons Sovereign was taken down in the first game. You're always free to talk to him in either game, but he still exists in kind of the background. He doesn't actually travel planetside, he doesn't fight, he doesn't shoot, but this short mission makes him the star of the show. We actually get to play Joker as he limps around the ship, watching the collectors kill or drag off the rest of the crew. He makes his way through the decks to eventually unshackle EDI and give her control. It's an incredible moment and completely cements Joker's character as a pivotal part of this series. Also, having us control an absolute powerhouse of combat for 2 games now, a true hero in the eyes of the galaxy, and then switching us over to someone who can barely walk is an incredibly stark contrast and can only make you feel for Joker. Not only that, but Joker fails. EDI lets open the airlocks to the entire ship and the collectors are swept away, but so is the entire crew. When the shuttle returns, he's reprimanded by Miranda harshly. Joker can pilot the ship, but outside of that, he can never be the gods that the people on this ship are. Thankfully, Jacob tells her off and she stops. The Reaper IFF is now functional, but the entire crew of the Normandy has been kidnapped by the Collectors. We have to decide here what we want to do: head through the Omega-4 relay immediately, or complete some missions first. The game openly gives us this choice as to what we want to do, but it doesn't really tell us exactly that every mission we complete without going after the crew members will kill more and more of them. I decided to head out right away. I couldn't sacrifice another member of my crew. Here, we have a couple hours of traveling to get through the relay itself. I went to my cabin, alone, and thought about Ashley. She wasn't ever coming back, but at least she said she was sorry. I couldn't bring myself to move on. I talked to the elusive man before we headed out, and I told him that we could make it, that the team was strong. We jumped through the Omega-4 relay, officially in the last stage of the game, the suicide mission. Now, the suicide mission is what this entire game has built up to, and is easily the most genius and my favorite part of Mass Effect 2. I want to talk about what happens in the story and what happened in my playthrough, and then we'll go back and talk about how it works, because that's the coolest part to me. We landed in an asteroid field. We found the Collector base, but immediately started getting attacked by them. We get fired on multiple times, but the upgrades to our ship thankfully held up. During this, we have to fight a huge machine called an Oculus on board the Normandy. The ship is eventually shocked down to the Collector base, where the enemy cruiser is destroyed. Here, we need to develop a plan to attack the base. We needed someone with a tech specialty to head through the vents and open the path to the main control center. I chose Kasumi for the job. She was adept at subterfuge and stealth. Everyone else would split up into 2 squads here, and I needed to choose a leader for the other. I picked Garrus, as he had to lead his crews to victory before, and would continue to do so now. I gave a rousing speech, and we began our assault on the Collector base. Defeating Collectors and pushing back the Harbinger, I also had to worry about Kasumi, and make sure that I opened up the valves for her to pass through each time she got stuck. We made our way through successfully, and Garrus's team and Kasumi herself survived. We found the rest of the crew that was captured. Dr. Chakwas said that the captured humans were being churned up, and the resulting sludge was being piped through the base. We decided to follow the pipes, but there were swarms of Seekers along the way, too many for us to fend off against. We needed someone with strong biotics to make sure they didn't touch us. That was Jack. Chakwas and the rest of the crew needed someone to escort them back to the ship, so I told Grunt to go with them. He was strong and capable. Here, we have to continue to fight the legions of Collectors while staying inside of Jack's biotic bubble. Eventually, we find out where the pipes lead to, a massive humanoid-like Reaper that the Collectors are building. We have to decide here whether we want to destroy the entire base, the human Reaper with it, or set a bomb that will kill all life forms aboard and let Cerberus take the technology. I decided to blow the place up. This tech could not end up in the wrong hands, or it would be a disaster, and the wrong hands may have been Cerberus themselves. The Reaper ended up awakening, and I had to fight it. There's 2 phases to the battle with this thing. In the first, we just fend off Collectors while we shoot at pods holding the Reaper in place. After that, the Reaper is animated and actually begins firing massive beams at us. We have to shoot its eyes and wear it down to eventually kill it. At this point, the platform was collapsing. I had Zaid and Garrus with me, and all of us tumbled off. When I woke up, they were both alive, and we made a run for it, heading back to the Normandy. Unfortunately, the defense crew on the ground had some casualties, Legion and Morden. I made my way back to the ship, one last massive jump onto the Normandy to end this thing and destroy the Collector base itself. The Harbinger proclaims that they will find another way, as the Reapers already have their eyes on humanity. I talked to the elusive man back on the ship. He was upset that we destroyed the base, but it was too dangerous. I told him that it was over for Cerberus. I was going to do things my way now. I was going to save the world, but I didn't have to settle for the help of bad people. Back on the ship, I mourned the 2 losses. Morden and Legion were good soldiers, and they gave their lives to ensure this mission was completed. We had to look forward now, though. There would be no more Sarens, no more Collectors. Now it was time for the final fight. The Reapers themselves. After the game ends, we can actually still continue journeying throughout the galaxy, completing any side missions we didn't finish and wrapping up our side content. There's also still the Renegade playthrough to go through for Mass Effect 2, but before we talk about any of that, I need to talk about the ending of Mass Effect 2, the suicide mission. I've talked a lot about how amazing the rest of Mass Effect 2 is. It's really one of the gold standards for choice-based narratives. Everything that it does throughout the game is really in service of its climax. Its best upgrade is the structure itself. We talked about this before with the building a team narrative and focusing on characters a lot more, but the genius of that structure can really only be seen once you inspect the final mission itself. We need to know what we're building up to, and what the consequences are to see how this all shakes out. At the beginning of the mission, the Normandy passes through a debris field. And there are 3 things that the game checks for here. There are 3 separate ship upgrades that we talked about earlier. If we didn't upgrade the ship's armor, the collector beam will just kill Jack inside the ship. If we didn't upgrade the shields, the drive core is overloaded and one person on the ship is killed in a specific order. Kasumi, then Legion, Tali, Thane, Garrus, Zaid, Grunt, or Samara, whoever is alive and on our crew first. The final check is whether we upgraded the Normandy's cannons. If we didn't, then another crew member will be taken out in a similar pecking order. Luckily, in our playthrough, we purchased all of these upgrades and no one had to die, but you can potentially lose 3 crewmates by neglecting these right off the bat. During the vent part of the mission, the choices come into play. We have to choose a vent specialist and a squad leader. Either of these choices have to be loyal crew members. If they aren't, they die during the mission and we lose them forever. The vent specialist, in our case, Kasumi, can also die if we don't open the vents in time. During the Seeker Swarm part of the mission, similar rules apply. The choices here have to be loyal crew, otherwise they'll die in this section. Again, we chose loyal crew members, so we had no casualties. The final part of the mission is the most important. We have to pick our squad to fight the last battle. This is where things get hairy, because we have to make sure that we pick 2 loyal squad mates, otherwise they'll die after the fight with the Human Reaper. The only issue with this is there's a calculation done on the remaining crew that are holding the advance on another part of the base. If this crew isn't strong enough physically to pass the check, the game will kill off a certain number of them, which is what happened in my playthrough. I sent Grunt back to the ship with the escort, so he wasn't available, and I took Zaid and Garrus to fight the Human Reaper with me. Therefore, the rest of the crew weren't as strong and had 1 crew member that wasn't loyal, Legion. Therefore, 2 of them were killed. The variables to this mission are actually kind of insane if you think about it. The outcomes depend on how many people you actually recruit throughout the game. Certain characters like Grunt and Legion you can decide not to recruit at all. Even the DLC characters don't have to be recruited. The loyalty is also a huge factor, which can mostly be skipped entirely. It wouldn't be very difficult to breeze through the game and end up with an entire dead team. This is where we get to our last variable. Shepard's jump into the Normandy. If Shepard ends up with 2 or less crew, he dies from this jump. And this isn't a game over screen type of death or a beginning of Mass Effect 2 type of death. This is a permanent death, the definitive bad ending. In this case, you won't even be able to import your save into the next game, because Shepard is canonically dead in that file, leaving you no one to play in the 3rd entry. The sheer amount of outcomes and variables in this mission exemplify prime narrative-based storytelling. This is how it should be. Most of the outcomes in Mass Effect 2 rely not necessarily on actual choices made throughout the game. They aren't the words that you say to other people, they're the things you do or neglect to do. An unsuspecting player could begin this game and journey through its story, entirely neglecting most of the loyalty missions because they might just think that they give you extra powers or story content. But when they get to the end of the game, they're hit with a massive wave of regret as all of their characters begin dying off in spectacular fashion. These characters don't come back either. They will not be around to see Mass Effect 3. Their deaths are permanent, and that effect that this has on the world and the story of the mission is huge. It's a drastic difference when comparing a successful mission to an unsuccessful one. It's comparing a massive triumph to an utter failure, attempting and barely succeeding to save the galaxy. The genius of this final mission is only furthered by all of the things we talked about before, especially when taking into account the loyalty missions. I was invested in Morden. I spent special time talking about his story because he felt like a special character. He was complex, troubled, and his issues were nuanced and incredibly deep. I felt bad for him. And on top of all of that, he was incredibly endearing. This fast-talking Solarian that was too intelligent for his own good was kind of charming. But now he's dead. We won the day, and we were now ready to take on the Reapers, but we lost one of our own. I couldn't save everyone, but you can. The suicide mission isn't just built to insta-kill enemies to make you feel sad inside. You can actually definitively win the day. If all your characters are loyal and you make the right choices throughout, everyone will survive. This is the definitive good ending, but I didn't achieve that. I was slightly off. One bad choice and one unloyal character made all the difference. The game had to take its blood for the Blood God, and its skulls for the Skull Throne. The god of Mass Effect 2 is not a merciful one. It's one that thrives on sadness, pain, and death. It builds your bond up just to break them down. It only rewards perfection. Otherwise, you end this story in virtual sacrifice, the currency of Mass Effect 2. And by God, is it executed perfectly. Now that we've talked about my main playthrough of Mass Effect 2, let's take a look at the other side. Like I said before, with narratives like these, I tend to do two playthroughs. One making my normal choices, generally leaning moral good, the paragon in this instance, and the other leaning morally evil, quote-unquote, the renegade in this instance. If you haven't seen my first video on Mass Effect, we'll be continuing with an imported save of the renegade character I made in that game, Jacoby Shepard. He led a ruthless campaign against the Reapers, Saren, and Sovereign. Just as it was last time, we heard a story of a fight against insurmountable odds. John Shepard built his crew, took his time to make sure it was strong and impenetrable. Even then, he still had casualties, but at the end of the day, he tried, and the bonds that he made with everyone on the Normandy couldn't be broken. They still won, still defeated the Collectors, and were more ready than ever to face off against the Reapers when they came. This is not that story. This is the story of one man fighting with everything he has against a force he doesn't understand. A man neglecting to listen to his team. A man that takes everything and gives nothing. A man barely scraping by. We were on a mission to wipe out the Geth. Our ship got attacked because we had an incompetent crew. Should have expected this. I tried to save them, but they wouldn't listen. Even Joker wouldn't hear me. Idiots. All of them. Idiots. I woke up years later on some military base. Had to fight my way out. Eventually, they told me what it was all about. I was a project. They resurrected me to make me fight for their cause, to stop the Reapers. I was fine as long as I got my life back. We headed to Freedom's Progress. I met Tali again. We rescued Vitor and he told us about the Collectors. She wanted me to give him up. I couldn't. We had to give him to Cerberus. He was too valuable. Cerberus convinced me to join them and gave me a new ship. I recruited Zaid and helped him find Vito. I told him he could kill him. This was his grudge, not mine. I helped him defeat the Blue Sun's leader. He was satisfied. I found Kasumi and helped her get Kaiji's gray box. We defeated Hawk and looked at the gray box. I told her to destroy the thing. It was way more important than some fling that she had with a colleague. I headed to recruit Okir. He was incredibly valuable, but he died, and we were left with his specimen. I didn't like the artificial Krogan, but he was incredibly strong, which meant he would be useful in the battle to come. I went to Omega and tried to recruit Archangel. It turned out to be Garrus, the Turian guy on my crew before. We had to help him defend against the Merc groups. He couldn't fight his own battles. We saved him and he finally got some battle scars. We went to recruit the Professor in the middle of a plague that didn't affect me. Some Batarian was whining about humans and I let him die. The Professor wanted me to do his dirty work, so I did. I rescued his friend and killed the men that captured him. He didn't like that. I rescued Jack from her prison. She was ungrateful, but there was something there. I couldn't see it yet. I went to Horizon and fended off the Collector attack. Kaiden was there. He hated the fact that I was working with Cerberus. He didn't understand. He didn't get the amount of power that they had, or how hard it was to get things done in this world. I found Tali again on a planet that was being destroyed. I rescued her with the help of Valerie Gar, a soldier that couldn't do his job properly. I had to convince her to come aboard, but I told her the Quarians owed me, because they did. I talked to Anderson and Udina. They wouldn't stop worrying about Cerberus. I thought they would be better than the Council, but they were just as inquisitive, just as roadblocky. I went off to find the assassin. Some soldier got in my way and I pushed him out of a window. Thane was using me. I needed him for my crew because he was powerful, but this wasn't something I would soon forget. I started talking to Jack. She was interesting, but guarded. She felt like the only person I could be myself around, if only for a brief moment. She would quickly close, but for that period, before she did, I felt whole. I helped Jack get rid of her past. I told her to kill her childhood friend. He wasn't worth it. She wanted to look around the complex, but I knew it wouldn't be good for her, and we didn't have time. I met Samara and got her to join my crew. I continued talking to Jack, but she wasn't ready to be honest just yet. I helped Miranda reconcile with her family, but I told her to keep her distance. We found the Collector ship and got the information on the IFF. I continued talking to Jack, and I made my feelings clear to her, but she needed time to think. She didn't want to talk to me anymore. I helped Samara draw out her daughter. We cornered her in her apartment, but when the two went to battle, I saved Morinth. She was the stronger biotic. This mission wasn't about retrieving the companions that I liked the most. It was about getting soldiers that were strong and capable of defending against the Collectors. We collected the IFF from the disabled Reaper. I helped Grunt with his rite of passage. He was a strong warrior, and those deserved to be prioritized on this mission. We needed the strongest of people if we were going to succeed. I killed Rex before, though, and the Krogans weren't too happy about that. They let Grunt go through with the rite regardless. Our crew was captured and we made our way to the Collector base. Jack made her feelings clear to me before we went on our final mission. Finally, someone I could feel open with. Someone I didn't have to be stern about. Someone I didn't have to control or order. This was right. We headed through the relay and the Collectors attacked our ship. Jack was dead. That feeling was gone immediately. I remembered quickly why I didn't try at these things. We headed out to get our crew back. Kasumi headed the ventilation squad, and Miranda headed the alternate squad. We found the crew and rescued them. Morinth protected us from the Seekers with her strong biotics, and Miranda led the alternative squad. I had Kasumi escort the crew back to the ship. They couldn't protect themselves. They were just engineers. I chose Grunt and Zaid to come with me on my final assault against the Collectors. I let Cerberus take the tech. They could do something with it, and we needed every advantage in this battle against the Reapers. After the battle, Grunt and Zaid survived the fall. We had many casualties in the battle on the ground, though. Morden, Tali, Thane, and Jack all died. I survived, though, so the mission was a success. I was too valuable. Everyone knew it, but I was the only one to say it. I was a hero, a symbol. I couldn't be killed or the galaxy would never be able to take down the Reapers. It just wasn't possible without me. The Elusive Man had used us the entire time. They needed to know their place, though. If they didn't use that tech right, I would be there. We had many casualties in the war against the Collectors, but they were gone. Unfortunately, we now had to worry about the Reapers, and I would be the one to take them down. Mass Effect 2 is an incredible game, and is a powerhouse of choice-based storytelling. On top of that, it's a huge upgrade in literally every single regard. Everything here works much better. The dialogue options, the morality system, the story structure, the final mission, side missions, characters, combat, skill systems, the Normandy, the galaxy traversal, the story itself, the lore. Every single thing here has been made better. This game is a masterclass in how to do a sequel better than the first. The morality system works much better in this entry because the choices that you make directly affect what options you can pick in dialogue. We can generally pass higher persuasion checks if we act closer to our morality. The combat is greatly improved and presents much more of a challenge than the first game. Mass Effect 2 isn't exactly difficult by any means, but it definitely feels more like a battle than the first. It also feels like each character has their own specialty, rather than being able to build any character however we want. More freedom might feel better in a traditional RPG, but a game with a pretty rigid world and story structure is served much better with characters that are more in line with that world. This makes each character also reflect their past, upbringing, or species. This creates another level of immersion that keeps us grounded in the world of Mass Effect, which is one of the most important tasks that the developers have. The DLC is also fantastic in this entry, and rather than just being a cash grab, it ends up being an expansion of the base narrative. It adds interest, context, lore, and new stories to tell. The Shadow Broker DLC adds information to every one of the characters in the game. After a very interesting boss fight with the Shadow Broker himself, we can actually look at his dossiers on all of our party members. Each mission pack feels like it adds a whole new story rather than just one extra mission for $10. This isn't even mentioning the 2 extra characters that the game adds. Zaid himself was one of my most picked squad members throughout both playthroughs because he was just that good. Their stories alone are also fantastic, and Kasumi's heist mission was one of my favorite loyalty missions in the game. The drastic change in story structure is one of the best things that this game does. Putting the focus on the team itself is integral. Each character gets the spotlight in this game. Every person has their moment. They each get a recruitment mission, which establishes their character and who they are. They're allowed a moment to board the ship and settle in. We can have conversations with them and eventually uncover who they really are, what their fears are, their regrets, their guilt, and then we realize how we can help them. Doing this not only gains their loyalty, which helps us in the game, but it lets us learn more about the character themselves. This makes the player more invested in their story and sets Mass Effect up for its final punch, the suicide mission. The suicide mission is designed to be a bleak affair. Unless you know what you're doing, you're probably going to have some casualties here. It was made that way. Of course, you can have a perfect playthrough, but the fans playing this game fresh in 2010 weren't aware of what was to come. I'm sure some of you are saying that completionists would have just done every mission and inevitably gotten a perfect game, but that's not necessarily true. There are multiple ways that you can lose loyalty in the middle of certain missions. Failing Thane's tailing section, siding against Zaid and missing the persuasion check. Just because you do the mission doesn't mean you're guaranteed loyalty. This whole mission ends up being a trap for first-time players to be forced to suffer a loss. This is why I say that Mass Effect 2 takes its virtual sacrifices seriously. This game wants you to fail upon first playthrough. Not only because it wants you to learn its systems and try again, but because it wants to have an effect. Mass Effect 2 wants you to realize what's at stake. If everyone lives on your first playthrough, you're doing it wrong. You've felt no consequences and you've suffered no losses. You haven't realized what a harsh world you are existing in. All of this isn't to say that it's impossible to get everyone to live in Mass Effect 2. It's very easy to do if you follow a thorough guide, but with a natural playthrough, if you're trying to find a good feel for the world, sacrifices must be made. Mass Effect 2 is a vicious god that wants its blood. It wants to elicit emotion. That's integral to telling its story. It must have death to finish its narrative. You can experience the paradise later. For now, you must feel. You must suffer. And Mass Effect 2 must have its death. In the end, Mass Effect 2 is a wonderful game. I think it exists in the upper echelon of choice-based narratives. It strikes a powerful balance between the railroaded haunted houses that parade themselves around as branching storylines and the free and open narratives of classic RPGs. It's a wonderful experience that doesn't even really hinge itself on the previous game or require you to play it. You'll be doing yourself a disservice by not visiting that entry, but it's not required reading. The game is must-play on my list and really shakes up storytelling and narrative like a lot of games weren't at the time. If you haven't gotten the message yet, play Mass Effect 2. It's a fantastic adventure, and the game requires your sacrifice to live. Mass Effect 2 was received to massive critical acclaim. Most reviewers praised the change in tone and the actual pressure that Mass Effect put on you to make choices. The Xbox 360 version still holds a 96 on Metacritic. Mass Effect won numerous Game of the Year awards from multiple different shows. The game has been listed in many different rankings as one of the greatest video games of all time. In 2011, it was placed in the Smithsonian Museum Art of Video Games exhibit. Mass Effect 2 sold 2 million copies in the first 2 weeks of release. Most projections put it outselling the first game by quite a lot. With the insane reception and the great financial success of the second game in the series, it looked like BioWare was finally going to be able to finish the trilogy that they had planned all along. All that was left was to release the third game in the series. But we'll talk about that next time. Bye, Dad. Hey Dad, just wanted to give a big thanks to everyone watching this video. I know this one took a while, but I really wanted to give a special treatment for Mass Effect 2. I also had a big move during this, so that kind of broke up the workflow a little bit. It was a really fantastic game, and I spent a lot of time on this one. Thanks for your support on all of the videos and the channel as a whole. I'm already at work on the next Mass Effect video, so expect that one soon. I wanted to quickly shout out everyone that supports me on Patreon. I really appreciate all of you. At the official dad tier is Isaac Dandridge, Sloppy Joe 11, Christopher Garcia, Shadow Cosmos, Oak, Doug Smith, Logan Johnson, Jared Dempsey, Spineless Skeptic, Steve Kwan, Nicholas Walther, GHL 300. Let's say hypothetically that a dog did learn how to use a computer. There's nothing illegal about that. Rona B, Casey Death Row Penley, Dosaico, Adam H. Gregory, Elzoid, Fel Martins, Autonomy, Jario, Ren, Callie Herbert, Davis Skelton, Alex Huff, Tim Pinkstaff, Mayday Fireball, Hannah A.O., Weed Monkey, Noah Borgen, John Wick, Hammond Atwell, Apo, Sir Newt Newt, Reger Temps, Zach Biscardi, Gabriel Pesic, Meet Virginia, Francisco Corona, Ciaran Hannigan, Trevor Ragland, Luveen Rupchand Wadwani, Tristan Wood, Jonathan Brown, Billy Connolly, Husband, Porter, Evangelidog, and Alexis Michelle. At the Good Dad tier, we have Shin Jammer, Anthony Conshu, Rifles for Heroes, Neom Richards, Combat Wombat, John Michael Poling, Colezone, Sinek, Dave Shapiro, and Lucas Ledvina. At the final Best Dad $20 tier, we have Isaac Hampton, Barsoman, and Isai Morales. Thank you to everybody that supports me on Patreon. I really appreciate it. I will see you next time. Bye, Dad.